I wish you bluebirds in the spring to hear your song, a song to sing, and then a kiss. More than this, I wish you love.
Welcome to the Forgiveness Solution. I am your host, Reverend Misty Tyme. Thank you so much for joining me today. You can find me at revmisty.com, and of course, right here at the Sacred Stories stream. You will also find other amazing podcasts just waiting for you to listen in and gain tons of wisdom from. Well, today on the Forgiveness Solution, I could not be more excited to interview Pamella Horton. Now, Pamella Horton is a modern-day spiritual explorer. What's wonderful about her, she's also created something called Calling the Real You. It's really exciting because she understands that through breakdowns, we get breakthroughs. Wonderful thing about Pamella, she doesn't work with just individuals. She works with corporations. And, sometimes corporations get a bad rap. But Pamela's out there to make sure that the corporations are getting the goodness and the wonderfulness and spiritual explorer of her and benefit. I'm so excited to interview you today. Pamella, can you say hello?
Hi there. Hi. Thanks for having me, Reverend.
Well, I'm really thrilled to interview you. Of course, I have to sit down and do some research, and I loved reading everything about you and all the things that you stand for and what you do. And could you share with our wonderful Forgiveness Solution audience?
Thank you. Hi, everyone. So, me. Reverend Misty had mentioned Calling the Real You, and it is a community. It's a blog. You can find us at callingtherealyou.com, and I started that because of who I was. Years ago, I was an overachiever, a people pleaser, a perfectionist, and completely beyond stressed. Suffered from heartburn daily and migraines at least twice a week that were completely debilitating, and really just was a lost soul, really living up to the labels that were given to me and gifted to me and that I inherited from my loved ones, and also the roles and the labels that I applied and owned myself over the years. And so as I began to explore life through spiritual eyes and through the eyes of forgiveness and compassion, I began to understand even better who I really was and who we really all are, which are perfect and whole. And I often invite people to imagine themselves when they were babies or infants or toddlers. And if you are unable to do that, at least visualize a picture of yourself at that age. And when you look upon yourself, even if you had a physical challenge, for example, you were still perfect. I was still perfect. We were born perfect. We all are, regardless of the circumstances. We were born without labels, without fear, and we inherited those things over the years. And so I began to call the real me out and had the calling to call the real you, all of you who are listening, out as well.
Wow, that's really beautiful, and it really speaks to every single person. We are here for a reason, and we are born perfect, and God gives us this wonderful gift, and sometimes fear steps in. We do the what if, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And
yeah, the what if.
The what if. What if I'm supposed to be, what if this person does this? And you brought in forgiveness, which right here on the Forgiveness Solution, I love to talk about forgiveness. It's like my juicy, lovely little nugget. But you talked about, labels and how important it is to kind of drop those sometimes, right?
Yeah, it's important to understand where they came from first of all. So if you are walking around with the label of I'm shy or I don't know when to quit, and I actually don't mean that in a positive light. I mean that if you were growing up and you had a lively personality and were told you don't know when to stop having a good time or stop laughing, there's a time and place for everything. If you were told that you were overweight or not smart enough or what have you, these are labels that we acquired and began to believe through repetition, primarily first and foremost, that these were true of ourselves. And so as an adult or as a young adult, if you find yourself saying certain things to and about yourself that are not necessarily nice or even potentially harmful, I invite everyone to ask themselves, how do I know this? Who is it that I heard this first from? And you will be delivered the answer. And if it is other than, if it's something that's not nice, if it's something that's not loving, it's not coming from Source or God, it's not coming from your higher power, it is coming from another ego. And it's all fine. It's because when you recognize that, you're able to begin to release it through repetition, just as you developed it through repetition.
You know, that really brings us to our childhood, right? And so much comes from our childhood, and a lot of people have really good intentions when they're putting those labels on you. It's not that your parents wanted to label you something because out of meanness, but I know I have 6 children, and I tend to look at them all differently as in their thing, what they like, what they do, and you can kind of label that way. And it's not intentional, but if it isn't a label that suits you, at some point you have to decide that was their label for me. It's not necessarily my label for me.
Yes, and it's not and I'll be honest with you all who are listening to this, it's not an easy task to do this. I often say that it's not faint for the heart, and people who are in the spiritual, personal development space, even professional development space, we all like to hear that there's a quick fix, a magic pill, an easy way of doing something. And the truth of the matter is, everything that we decide to take on to change or improve requires time and practice, and so it's not necessarily easy. So I definitely invite you to be kind to yourself if you are trying to change a label.
I agree, because it does take a while, because some of those labels, even not the good juicy ones, but the uncomfortable ones, we actually kind of roll that in our heads so much it does become part of us, and we believe it, whether it be you're not good enough, you're not the smart one, you're, like you said, overweight, you don't look like everybody else, you need to change this, and we hear that over and over, and it gets stuck on us. And that's where I really believe that forgiveness comes in. You kind of almost have to forgive the people that stuck that label on you so that you could kind of work through it. And you're right, it's not something usually happens overnight.
It isn't. 2 things I want to say real quickly. When you want to change a habit, there's a minimum of 10 days. There's a 10-day rule or research that's been done on 10 days. In fact, there was a study done. It was called the Olive Study, where children and adults who didn't like olives ate 1 olive every day for 10 consecutive days. And they built that discipline and practice in for themselves. Of course, it was a research study. But at the end of day 10, they actually acquired the taste for the olive. And so to acquire a taste for peace, acquire a taste for prosperity, acquire a taste of being healthy versus unhealthy, whatever it is that you're trying to change, it does require that practice. So 10 days, and it just requires the discipline to stick with it for a minimum of 10 days. 21 days is great, but 10 days is good too. And then, forgive me, I'm actually, the forgiving of others for placing those labels on you. I like to refer to the story of when Jesus actually was crucified on the cross. When he was on the cross, can you imagine, and this is for, it doesn't matter what philosophy or religion or theory you subscribe to, just I invite you to hear me out for a little bit here. If you can take the man Jesus, who went through sweating of tears and blood because he was so flipping nervous and scared of the choice and sacrifice that he made or decided to make to be crucified. And here he is on the cross just before he's about to pass away, and he says, "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do." And those individuals who are in our lives for whatever reason, whether we attracted them, whatever theory you subscribe, the law of attraction, they're based on, their family, whatever it is, they do not know what it is that they are doing, because the majority of us people who do not put in consistent, deliberate practice in being awake are still slumbering. Their soul is still slumbering. And if you are not awake to how we are operating, which is from our ego, the majority part of the time, which is edging God out, or your higher power, source, universe, etc., when we edge God out and live from that space, we are not awake to the fact of what our thoughts and our actions are doing to ourselves and to others. If we really understood what it was that we were doing to somebody and to ourselves at any given point, would we really do it? And the answer is no. We wouldn't want to make someone feel badly. And so, yes, forgiving of those is super important.
I agree, and I think we run on these unconscious what ifs, and we keep trying to fix it, and we live in this fear that if we don't, something's going to go wrong, right? That it's not going to work, and I'm going to be in trouble, or something bad is going to happen, and I've got to stay on top of it. And we what if ourselves, and we what if our kids, we what if our family, and even our friends, our spouses, and that puts us in fear for sure. And that was a beautiful example of Jesus hanging on the cross. And yes, every major religion and sacred scripture talks about, the unconscious labels, but in a different way, right? They all speak a little bit differently, but they bring in the forgiveness, like you just said. If they don't know what they're doing, they're not awake. It depends on which religion you're talking about.
Misty, I'm sorry. If I could interrupt for a second, would it be all right to share a personal example?
That would be beautiful. Actually, I was going to ask you for one, so you must have been right on the same track. So please share.
So even if you are awake, right, and do and practice and have a spiritual practice, such as myself, for example, every day I wake up, there are certain rituals and practices that I have to remain aware and in the moment, which is the magical place to be, to live a peaceful and abundant life. Having said that, there are still things that trigger me, right? Fear, when I am allowing fear in and not residing in love, it still happens. Or when I'm in the process of up-leveling, when I'm about to go to the next level of my career or my spiritual being, there is always turmoil and conflict and adversity, darkness before the dawn. And I'll be honest with you, just today, my business and my career are up-leveling. I'm in the process of rebranding and coming out in a very different way. And it's scary. I still, and when you are in that fear, I'm coming from ego, and therefore I'm residing in the old patterns and in the old labels of being a perfectionist and a people pleaser. And so my husband has been asking for material from me for a while. And he's been asking this question of me for a while. And every time he asks this question, I get completely, I call it the 3 Ds, defensive, deflective, and then I finally dismiss him, all which are not nice. Not at all. And, he asked the question of me today, and I immediately defended myself. I immediately deflected the question, and then I dismissed the situation. But in between defending and deflecting, I got a little nasty. I completely was triggered, and I reacted, and then I reacted in a way that was, what's the phrase, not nitpicky, but I was just, I just reacted in a way that I would not normally react, but was very common for this scenario. And so he called me out on it, which is rightfully so. And, when he called me out on it this time that I did it, I was able to just listen instead of continuing the deflection and the defending of my behavior. And I rested in what it was that the situation itself. And in other words, I said to myself, oh, God, in my head, here I did it again. But I didn't beat myself up over it. I just recognized it. I released or relaxed in the scenario, and then I released the fear and the language that I was using towards myself at that time and towards him in my head at that time. And then we both were able to receive what it was that we were looking for. Peace around the scenario. I was able to answer him finally. We got it finalized and resolved, and we were able to move on, which is what we all wanted, what we both wanted. So I relaxed in the situation. I released the fear and the labeling and how I treated him and myself, and then I was able to receive the final outcome that we were wanting the entire time, which, by the way, this is almost 6 or 7 weeks in the making. So you're going to trip up, you're going to have hang-ups, you're going to react, and forgiveness is a glue that ties all of that together.
It is. I actually say that forgiveness is the link between love and healing. If love solved everything, right, the husband that loves you so much, you would just easily hand over the information he's looking for, but you're stuck in your fear. And it's not that you don't love your husband, and you probably couldn't be more grateful that he's willing to help you and do things for you. That's just a beautiful thing. Nice guy, by the way.
Thank you.
But
I am blessed.
Yeah, you are very blessed. We get stuck in that fear, and to get from the love to the healing, you really do need to forgive both yourself or the situation, the other person, whatever their patterns and they're running on. And I thought that was a beautiful example, and I have to tell you, I personally relate to it right now so much. I feel the fear of my brand changing, and it's a good change, but I struggle because I don't know what to say sometimes, so I get stuck, and I'd rather, and you said it exactly, get a little defensive and then also dismiss. I'm really good at dismissing, like, later, and that was a great example, and I'm sure a lot of the Forgiveness Solution listeners can relate. And I love the fact that you acknowledged it. You didn't beat yourself up over it, but you acknowledged it, which helped you move through it.
Yeah, when we experience moments like that, it's nothing more than a neon sign or a note card that says, hey, you're not in alignment here. You're not connected and grounded. You're not connected to source, and you're not grounded. And it's an invitation versus an adversary or a war that you have to fight. And, by the way, you guys, we are creatures of habit,
mm-hmm.
and we have to stay with familiarity, because that is what has kept us alive for eons, right? When, as a human being, as a living being, we must belong to a tribe and be accepted by a tribe. If you think back to Neanderthal days or caveman days, if we left our pack by ourselves and our pack was familiar and we decided to leave, we would either be eaten by a larger animal
mm-hmm.
or killed by another tribe because we were not familiar to them. So our survival depends on our familiarity. And if we're familiar with labels or with our brand, in this case, this specific situation, Misty, if we're
mm-hmm.
familiar with certain things, it keeps us alive. But at some point, we have to take inventory and ask, is this serving us any longer? And if the answer is no, that's when we have to create new habits for ourselves and replacing the old ones.
And also, it might be okay, it might be serving you okay, but are you really growing is the piece. And growth is kind of scary, isn't it?
100% of the time.
100% of the time. And
100% of the time.
My favorite quote in life is from Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and there's no growth without loss and no loss without growth. And it speaks to the fact that when we're growing, we do tend to lose something, like we're dropping something off. And so we're changing patterns, so we're losing the old patterns. We're trying to grow, learn something new, expand. But there's usually a little bit of loss, and it's almost grief a little bit. Like you want to say, no, I don't want to lose what's comfortable. And so I'll run back in there, just like you said, dismiss and deflect. I'll run back to what's comfortable. I know how to do that. And I think that's just a great example of how we get stuck in, well, what if this happens? I don't know how to do this. I'm not good enough. Going back to those labels that we've been trained to have for years and years. And I just think your work is fabulous and really helpful to so many people.
Thank you. It's almost self-defeating. It actually, not almost, it is self-defeating when we don't recognize just how special we are.
Mm.
And when we don't allow ourselves to flourish. So if we are living in the question of what if, and then following that with a worst case scenario, we're imagining the worst case scenario. Therefore, we are creating a self-fulfilling prophecy that will live and reside in a worst case scenario. When we have such beautiful brains, our brain will make us right no matter what. And one of my favorite quotes is by Henry Ford: whether we think we can or we think we can't, we are right.
I agree. Go Henry Ford. I totally agree
right?
with that. Yeah.
And so if we can begin to recognize just how much of a miracle we all are, for goodness sakes, we breathe without intention. I mean, our body is a machine that will breathe involuntarily so that we can remain alive. If that can take place, we can certainly take control of our subconscious thoughts and begin to direct them.
And I think we don't realize our own power and the power of our brain and our heart and our soul, that when we do make that decision, whether it be a decision to forgive or try something new or leave something old behind, we don't realize the power we really do have within us to access that. We really can move forward.
True. And those of you who are listening, really, I invite you to take this in with every cell that you are right now. If you do not run your subconscious mind yourself, someone else is going to run it for you.
Wow. Can we just stop with that right now? Because I will tell you that statement was true to my heart, and I'm sure many other listeners. Like, I think we need to say that again. If you don't run your own subconscious mind, somebody else will for you. Right.
Yes.
And it kind of then throws us back into the negative things we've heard in our life that we believe about ourselves.
Oh, absolutely. And then and to uncover that, you can ask the question, how do I know this? Is this true? Mm-hmm. And then allow that to unfold and really settle in with you. And that's not just according to labels either about your subconscious mind. I mean, we are what we consume. So if we're consuming shows, for example, that have killings and plots against people and who are mean towards one another, we are consuming that, and eventually we become that. We become desensitized to it, and we become it in our thoughts and our words. And I'm not saying that if you watch a show for years that has killing and maiming, that you are going to go out and kill and maim physically. But what ideas and dreams are you killing and maiming within yourself and in others?
I agree. You know, again, I've mentioned I have kids. I think on this podcast I've mentioned my kids more than any other time. But I used to tell them when they were like preteens, trash in, trash out. It's important that you pay attention to where you are, what you eat, drink, watch, the music you listen to, because, excuse me, it makes us more, you're right, desensitized to it. But then it also makes us more able to join into it, whether it be negative talk. I have a real thing about cussing in my family. And I'm like, you know, you're smarter than that. You can pick a different word. And if it becomes your normal, then the negative becomes your normal.
And again, to your point, it's familiar.
Yeah, and it's familiar, exactly. So.
Yeah.
In your professional life, when you're leading clients and corporations through this no-label piece and to a better spiritual place, can you give me a story, of course without names or anything, about a professional situation?
Yeah. Before I go into the story and example, I just want to share that the programming that we do with companies, we refer to them as enhancement benefits because companies currently have voluntary benefits. They bring in companies or wellness programs that educate individuals. But what they don't do, and offer resources to the employees, they address certain scenarios, weight loss, smoking cessation, and things of that nature. They even made work with spirituality. But what they don't do is get to the root cause of the why behind an individual is engaging in that familiar activity like smoking or negative thinking or are in their own way and therefore can't rise up the corporate ladder, so to speak. And with what we do at Maven's Connections is we address the mindset first and foremost and then address the physical component, the emotional component, and the spiritual component. But if you can't change the mindset, nothing else changes. There's no long-lasting effect. And so we offer people a real chance to truly change their lives for the better, as well as the corporate culture and then, of course, the community as well. And one of the stories that I want to offer up is there was two women, a part of the same company, same team, but different responsibilities, and they couldn't stand each other. And the hostility and the negativity within the department was palpable, and it really affected everyone in that department. It was extremely hostile. And when we came in and began to coach and mentor them and work them through our programming, and this sounds trite, but this is just a perfect example of changing how one thinks. We began to invite them to, as soon as they caught the negative, angry thoughts that they were having towards the other individual, and actually this is another conversation for another interview, but let me just stick with what I'm saying here.
Okay.
Real quickly, everything that we are in our thoughts, we are all vibrational beings. You put a solid material underneath the right microscope, and you will see that solid material breaks down into molecules that are actually vibrating. And so our thoughts vibrate out, our intentions vibrate out, and then what vibrates out is actually coming back and is mirrored in our physical world around us. So through our programming, these two individuals we invited to begin to bless the other individual versus really condemn and damn, which is what they were doing when they were thinking negatively and poorly about each other or wishing or whatever, it being in an angry state of mind. And when they began to bless the other individual, even if it was from an angry state of being, more and more repetitiously, consecutively, continuously, they actually began to feel even better about the other individual and about each other. They began to bless that other individual, bless themselves in turn, and then bless the entire situation as a success. And again, I want to tell you that this sounds trite, but once they began to activate that and implement it daily, multiple times throughout the day, again, whenever they caught themselves thinking ill wishes towards the other individual, they began to forgive the other individual and each other. And within 2 weeks' time, one of the individuals actually moved on to another company. And harmony began immediately as soon as the blessings began and the forgiveness began, but harmony was absolutely instilled once that final change was made.
Oh, I literally have goosebumps. When I work with my clients, whatever their big forgiveness issue is, a lot of them come in with work situations, and they feel that the person in their environment is out to get them, and so they need to be out to get them. Otherwise, they're going to get hurt if they don't stay on the defensive. And I always talk about them as the other person, to think of them as a child, like you mentioned earlier, different things like that. But also, I didn't ever think of them actively blessing the person. That kind of goes to what we should do with our, quote, enemies, right? And that's just a beautiful example. It's not trite at all. It's absolutely perfect, Pamela, just really perfect. And I hope that everyone who's listening can glean some wonderful nuggets from it, because that's a great example of how forgiveness works, how our thoughts work, and the fact that you have the power to change the atmosphere. You have the power. You don't have to have somebody else change or be different. You have the power by blessing and changing your thoughts. And it was really beautiful. Thank you.
You're welcome. Even one last tip here, guys. If you, actually two, sorry. If you, one of the ways to be able to make sure that your being, your state of mind is that of peace, because when you're in that state of being and state of mind, really nothing can harm you. And I mean that. You are a powerful creator. Nothing can harm you when you are creating peace from within. And you can create peace within by beginning to pay attention to your body language, your body posture, and your facial expression. These three indicators are huge portals to how it is that you are feeling in any given moment. When you identify what those three things are and how you are being, body posture, body language, and facial expression, you become aware of what you're feeling, and then you can change it by blessing yourself and the situation a success. Simply and just wholeheartedly and say it enough and as often as needed until you actually feel the energy shift behind it. So that's one tidbit that I'd like to offer. And the second tidbit is this works even if you are sitting in traffic or are running late for a meeting. If you are in your car and you are finding yourself complaining about the lights turning red just before you get there, or being stuck in traffic, or complaining about a driver, begin to bless the drivers everywhere, everyone in every vehicle around you. Just bless them consistently. Bless yourself and the entire situation a success. You will find, and this is a nice little game I like to play with myself. If I'm running late and I begin to do that when I catch myself complaining about it, I end up arriving on time. So I invite you to play that game. And do that while you're driving. And it just, your blood pressure, everything just calms right down, and you are placed right in the perfect moment.
Well, Pamela, this has been a perfect moment. I need to tell you that this has been just a stunning, stunning example of somebody who can work in a corporate world and with individuals, and even your personal stories have really touched me, and I know they've touched our listeners. And thank you for reminding us that not only do we get stuck in what ifs and labels, but to get ourselves out of that negative thought and to start blessing the people around us, even, quote, the people we don't really like very well. And that's just beautiful. And thank you so much for joining me today. If somebody needs to get a hold of you or wants to work with you, how would they find you?
Thank you. It's been a pleasure, Misty, and it's been a pleasure to share this time and energy with all of you. You can find me a couple of places, actually. Facebook is really the friendliest and most open. So my name is Pamella with 2 L's, and my last name is Horton, as in Horton Here's a Who. I invite you to find me on Facebook, and I also have the Calling the Real You Facebook community page there as well, or mavensconnections.com. And you can feel free to email me at mavensconnections@gmail.com.
That's perfect, and I'll make sure that we also have that up on the Forgiveness Solution Facebook page and my personal page, so that people can also find you. And I also want to tell everybody that, I'm really excited. My book is done, and it's on pre-order. You can actually pick it up both on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, The Forgiveness Solution, a step-by-step process to let it go. And I just want to thank everybody for your support and love that I've been feeling the last couple of weeks as I've announced this, and my excitement grows every day, and I'm stepping out of fear and dropping some old labels. Thank you, Pamela. And I can't wait to hear from all of you. So please get a hold of me at revmisty.com or revmisty@outlook.com, or find me, of course, on Facebook and Instagram at revmisty. Have a blessed day.
I wish you bluebirds in the spring to hear your song, a song to sing. and then a kiss. More than this, I wish you love.